Creating textures for games is an art form on its own. A deep exploration of this is outside of the scope of this course. I'll take a look, though, at the textures we have in here and the possibilities of economizing, reusing textures in our game projects, as optimization is always a big concern in making games. I've got my fire truck pulled into my test scene and selected. We can see it's a standard shader with a specular setup. In that shader, we've got an albedo, specular, normal, and occlusion. What I'm going to do is take a quick look at these textures and the different channels they can take in, and see if there's any possibilities here for optimizing and reusing textures. If we mouse over the albedo, what we can see is that the albedo is an RGB map, and there's transparency in the alpha. We don't have any transparency here. This is all geometry, including the rungs in the ladder. So there's nothing here that needs to be clear or see-through, but that is a possibility. Rather than a separate transparency map, because it's a single channel, grayscale, where is it transparent or not, we can embed that in the albedo. The specular, though, is an RGB and smoothness in the alpha, and this has some possibilities for using one image in multiple places. A normal map is just an RGB image, so we do have a spare alpha channel there if we needed to use it for something. I'm going to take a look at these images in Photoshop, see how they're laid out, and look at possibilities for optimizing a bit. Here in Photoshop, I've opened up my diffuse, normals, occlusion, and specular for the fire truck, as well as my floor diffuse. In the fire truck diffuse, which is really the albedo here, we can see that it's the raw color without any lighting data. There are some things that are implied in. There's some additional detail here for the wood grain to highlight what's going on with the normal. There's the decaling, fire department, the hose, the window, and so forth. Right now, this is just an RGB image. There's nothing going on in the alpha channel because, again, we don't have transparency. But it's a possible place to insert something else in that simply requires a value in there. The normal map consists mostly of wood grain, with some overlaid flatter sections for the windows, and then a hose and the fire department logo, so they sort of stand off the model a little bit. Again, in the normal map, there's no alpha channel, so if we needed another alpha for some reason, we could put it in here and use it again in the Unity editor. The occlusion is a baked occlusion, this one coming from either 3ds Max or Maya, for example, where the occlusion has been rendered into this texture space and defines for us where this model receives or does not receive more indirect lighting. Here's our specular, and this presents some possibilities for adjustment. As you recall, the standard with specular setup shader has a specular and a smoothness value, the specular being an RGB. It's the color of the highlight and reflection. The smoothness, then, is the microsurface detail that determines how the light spreads on a model or is concentrated. Right now what we're seeing is that the specular is a grayscale, with some slight variation on the different features on the fire truck. And this presents an opportunity for us if we'd like to color that highlight to match the fire truck rather than a gray. The specular then has the alpha, and this determines where that fire truck is smoother or not. Smoother on the hose, the fire department decal, and the windows. Rougher and more wood grained, with some variation to match the wood grain on the other parts. What we can do is color some of the RGB of the specular, and I'm going to do this and see how it looks. I'll borrow from the diffuse so that the color in the shine fairly matches the color here. I'll select it, Controller Command A, copy it, Controller Command C, and go over to my specular. I'm going to paste this in, Controller Command V, and we'll see how this looks then as a saved version. Right now we've got our two layers, layer 1 in the background, but in the alpha we still see our grayscale. If we turn on RGB and alpha, we can see it as a mask, showing that we're going to have the same specular color to match the diffuse or the albedo, but the alpha defining the shine. I'll save this out as an experiment, choosing File and Save As. I'm going to save this out as Firetruck Specular 2, TIFF. I'll save it as a copy, turning off layers and leaving the alpha channel on, so I get the color plus the alpha, and see how this looks. What we can see also is that these images are square. We can take in a non-square image if we need to in the Unity editor, but game textures are typically square and in a power of 2. I'll take a look at the image size on this, choosing Image and Image Size. What we can see here is that this image is 1024 square. This is a power of 2. Powers of 2 are 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1024, and 2048 square. So typically what we'll see for our game textures is that there's some power of 2, and this helps us compress better in the Unity editor. What we're also seeing with this image is that it's authored at 1024 square, which really means that we should downsize it in the Unity editor to 512 square, again reducing our size and optimizing the amount of memory we're using and getting a better blending in the colors somewhat. When I went back to the Unity editor, I did see that my textures appeared to jump. What really happened is that it automatically imported that second specular I've created and inserted it alphabetically here into the textures folder where I had saved it. What I'm going to do is to put this on that fire truck model and see how this looks. I'll take this new texture I've made and drop it into specular. There's a definite change. What we can see here is that the fire truck really has a little more wood-like appearance. And the other thing is that we're seeing the color of that specular highlight match the albedo. It depends on how we want it to look. This again is an artistic decision. The closer that the shine matches the albedo, the more plastic it looks. The farther away those get, the more metallic it looks. What I'm going to do is to alter those colors slightly and bring it in again as one more experiment. Back here in Photoshop, I've turned off my alpha so I can see this texture cleanly, and I'll adjust it by adjusting the levels a bit. I'll press Ctrl or Command L and just brighten this up a touch and see how this looks. I'll brighten it up so that this color is derivative of the albedo, but considerably brighter. Not entirely washed out, but definitely not the same straight color. I'll click OK, and I'm also going to go into the alpha channel and adjust the smoothness. Again, I'll use my levels here, although you can use whatever tool you'd like. What we can do is to pull these around. I'm going to make my brights a little bit brighter, but then keep the other spots that are dark, well, still dark. This will really enhance the wood grain across it, and I'll save this out again and see how this looks in Unity. I've replaced that texture, and I'll jump back into Unity and watch it update. Unity imported and updated. We can see my new texture here. There's my new alpha channel, and it looks pretty good. It's got a good painted wood feel to it. As an experiment, I'll try this in instead of a specular over as a standard and see how it looks. Definitely has a different feel because we're seeing that specular color, the highlight, derived from the smoothness and metallic values of our material. We can try as an experiment then, pulling one of the specular maps in to see how it behaves. Remember that metallic is a red channel and smoothness is an alpha. I'll pull the first fire truck specular into the metallic. What we can see is it's got a good appearance. We've gotten here a fairly dull fire truck, but it definitely reads as painted wood. What we are seeing is that that smoothness really nicely spreads the light across the surface, and then the letters and the hose really glimmer in conjunction with that normal map. I'll move my light around and just check. I'll pick my directional light, hit E to rotate, and spin it in the scene so we're seeing the fire truck more in light. We can really see that light travel across the bright surfaces here. This is working quite well, and we're seeing in here a good deal of flexibility in our texturing workflow. What this means is that there's many different ways to accomplish the look you need to get in your game. There's not necessarily one right way. It really depends on what you're after artistically and how everything needs to tie together. I like the way this looks, where I'm running in a standard shader without the specular setup, and it really reads as a painted wood toy that would be found on a bedroom floor.